Welcome everybody.
No, we're
All right,
live.
we should have some people trickling in right now. This is the Mongol live Q&A. We're going to do a little bit of behind the episode discussion in this one. So the Mongol versus Mamluk one, if you haven't seen it yet, you should go check that out. And in a couple minutes, I'll bring on Jackmeister. For the last maybe like 3, 4, maybe 5 Mongol videos, he's helped me out with some secondary sources, primary sources, and then a ton of, and you'll see a little bit in this live stream, a ton of super minute details where it's kind of like, who knows what early Mamluk hairstyles are? Jackmeister knows what they are. And so it makes its way into our video. Andrew Turnet says, how do y'all get that beautiful illustration? That's Joe. That's the guy on the right.
That's all me.
Yeah, so if you're new to the live stream thing or new to History Dose, we're a two-brother team. I do all the writing, the research and narration, and then Joe does all of the art and editing, and more has been actually composing the music for the videos. So some like the throat singing that you were hearing in the last one, or the drums, is actually Joe doing that as well.
Well, I'm not doing the throat singing myself, but certain samples I'm using. Yeah,
he's still learning the skill. Okay, so as we get started, though, I kind of wanted to show. There we go. All right, so we got the History Dose and Jackmeister Mongol live stream. I just wanted to shout out before we get started the Turkey trip. So that's in June 2024. I know, like, here in the Northern Hemisphere, summer's ending. It's a good time to plan your vacations for next summer. June 2024. There's so much stuff in Turkey, guys. Like,
I don't know,
when it was first voted for by you guys, I was like, it's not necessarily, it's like, oh, Turkey's cool, but it's not necessarily what you think like a history trip is Turkey. And then I'm like, oh, I guess they were here and this civilization was here. So just in this picture, I mean, you got the ancient Greek city of Ephesus. You have the Ozkanok underground city. It's 10 stories deep. And there were I think up to 10,000 people or more that could live underground. And then a hot air balloon ride. It's like a week long. It's technically 9 days, but some of those are incoming travel days. But right in the description, stay on the live stream. But of course, you can click on that in the description, open up another tab and check it out at the end. And yeah, like I said, there's so much stuff that happens in Turkey. Like, you had the ancient Greeks there, the Persian Empire, the Romans. If you liked our Harold Hardrada series, the Varangian Guard was there. So we'll actually go to the Hagia Sophia, where they have Viking graffiti there. Seljuk Turks, as you saw in the last episode, the Mongols were there. The Mamluks kind of get into Turkey, and they're fighting in there. Baybars is there. And then, of course, the Ottoman Empire. So yeah, just check it out. Honestly, just open it. No pressure to come, but check it out. Google some of the sites, and you'll see it. It should be a really fun time. Seeing some comments coming in. Happy to get some people in here. All right, so without further ado, let's get the Jackmeister in here. Here we go. Add him to the stage. Here we go. Jack, how's it going?
Welcome.
Yeah, merhaba. You guys will enjoy Turkey. Turkey çok güzel. I was just there this summer again, my second visit. My girlfriend's Turkish, so we went and saw her family again. And we visited Ephesus, not this year, but the year before. And it's really, really wonderful sights.
If I remember, you saw some Mongol stuff there as well?
Yes, in Ankara. There was on the Kala in Ankara, on the castle in the center of Ankara, there's inscription on the fortress which dates to the late Ilkhanate period. They mention like the taxes of the Khan, and I believe in the museum, the Museum of Anatolian Civilizations in Ankara, on the same hill where the citadel is. on the castle, they have a few Mongol coins.
Oh, wow.
And there's a nice little museum of, I'm trying to remember the name now. It's something like Museum of like Traditional Turkish Archery or something. Like, just once you leave the Museum of Anatolian Civilizations, you get this cute little like cafe and a museum full of old Turkic weapons, bows and arrows, and costumes, and you get to try on hats and things. And it's a lovely time. But Turkey's a great, great place to see.
Yeah, it seemed it's going to be an exciting trip. I just feel like it was like a hotbed of just ancient and medieval activity. So there's so much there to see.
It's great fun when someone goes, oh, this isn't so interesting, this spot, it's only 300, 400 years old. I think in Canada, not a lot of structures pushing.
Yeah, I mean, in America, the most ancient things we have, like from the, beginning of the country after European colonialism, I mean, it's only a few hundred years old. So it's hard for me to fathom just living among ruins that are thousands of years old.
Yeah. So, Jack, talk to us about what you do. Where do you get this? Where do you get off calling yourself Jackmeister Mongol history? What's your relationship to Mongol history, and how does it make up a part of who you are?
All right. So I've now been studying the Mongol Empire for, I don't know precisely, probably around 10, 11 or so years now. I'm currently doing my PhD on the Mongols here in Vienna. My specific area of research on my PhD relates to the Golden Horde in the late 13th century, and looking at sort of this period of crisis like the 1280s and relating to the second Mongol invasions of Hungary and Poland. But I've written on all sorts of aspects for the Mongol Empire. I'm the fellow who writes for all of Kings and Generals videos on the Mongols now. I wrote their podcast series on the Mongols. I write for Medievalists, a couple other channels. I've published a few articles in magazines, and for 7 or 8 years now, I've been doing this Jackmeister stuff, which is I started back in, I don't know, 2017, 2018. I had a afternoon of frustration because there was very little for good historical content on YouTube at the time. And I remember like looking up, I just wanted to like watch.
That's because it was pre-History Dose.
Exactly. That's exactly what I said too. Like, if only History Dose had started. Yeah. And I think I had sort of like this feeling of like, well, no one's putting any Mongol stuff up here. I'm starting to learn about this stuff here. I should put 2 and 2 together here and just start, as I'm learning stuff, put it online. And that's what I started doing. And I've learned so much since then, and I cannot watch any of my old stuff because I see that old stuff and go, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. He's not really getting it. Like, as I've gone now through my undergraduate degree and master's, now my PhD, and published these articles and done all this much more research, and I've as I've gotten to understand the period much more, and you realize when you're first starting out and you grab like say Jack Weatherford's Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, and this is something that you grab on like any bookshelf in a library in North America, that because if they have anything on the Mongols, they'll have Jack Weatherford's book, and a handful of things like this, some stuff by John Mann. And as you get deeper, you realize how like Weatherford's stuff is just barely scratching the surface of anything. Yet for most of what you see online, people are relying almost exclusively on Weatherford's book. So everything that I do, I have sort of like a motto for myself. If you can get it in the Wikipedia article, then what I'm writing has not gone nearly enough. So everything I do is always based off the primary sources, academic literature. A lot of the things I write now are just my own research. I'm working right now on a video on the daughters of Genghis Khan. And even going through that made me realize how many academics just have no idea what's going on with the daughters of Genghis Khan. You'll find, and part of the problem here is a lot of the medieval writers had no idea what was going on with his daughters. We have this one very important late 13th century, early 14th century writer in the Ilkhanate named Rashid al-Din. And he gives 3 completely different, incompatible versions of one daughter's marriage to this one other king. And essentially every single version is like they can't overlap at all. They're 3, like I said, totally incompatible things. And you read through this and you realize how many he's sort of just like stopped at like the first one that showed up in the text and went, all right, that's good enough for me. And didn't stop and go, well, hang on a second. What's going on here with these other versions that go through there? So this is, it's a bit about, and I guess regarding the name Jackmeister, well, that was, it was a nickname in high school. And then when you had to sign up for Google, that became like my Google account name. And then I signed up for YouTube, and that became like the name on YouTube automatically or something. And I kind of thought, well, I'll come up with a better name at some point.
Yeah,
I never came up
Jack's
with a better
Mongol
name,
history doesn't work anymore. And actually, when I'm talking to Joe about you, and I'm like, okay, like we have these new references. I don't say Jack. I actually call you Jackmeister. I'm like, oh, Jackmeister got us some references. So, as far as I'm
the mistake
concerned,
people make is that they say Jackmeister, but it's the Jackmeister, and because there's lots of other people calling themselves Jackmeister online. There's only one.
You're the great Jackmeister. You're the Kagan.
Yeki Jackmeister.
In the in the service of finding crappy stuff on Wikipedia as sources, since we have Joe here too, I was thinking we could start out the stream talking a little bit about the art process, and I have some fun art to take a look at. By the way, I'm seeing some of these questions in the chat. Probably as we go along, there'll be a little bit of natural pauses to, if you have a Mongol related question, I can sort of repeat it to Jack and get his thoughts on it. But after we go through a little bit of this art, then we'll have more of a period just to straight up talk about to go to a proper Q&A. Okay, so let's do this. Here we are. Yep, we can see us on the side. All right. So this was a piece of art. This is literally on Wikipedia. If you're finding an image of Einjalut on Wikipedia, so Einjalut, if you guys don't know, that was the big battle. It's in the last video, and it's often touted as the battle that broke the Mongols, although we'll talk a little bit about how true that is a little bit later on. But this was something that Jack first, you took aim at this. Tell me why this is wrong.
It's hard to know where to start. The best one, of course, is the fact that the pyramids are present in this depiction of the battle. Because what my best guess here is that the author looked up like Egyptian Mamluks and heard Egypt and assumed the battle was in Egypt in front of the pyramids, but the battle wasn't fought in Egypt.
Yeah, I put the Google Maps there. Jack, I don't know why you're so angry. It's only 900 kilometers away. This is the Google Maps, right from where it was fought to the Great Pyramid.
It's only a stone's throw away.
I think, I actually looked. If you follow that route on Google Maps, it's like an 8-day walk, which actually that's shorter than I thought. 8-day by foot, you're moving pretty quickly.
40 days and 40 nights. Sorry.
Maybe you could. It's not in Egypt, but you know how sometimes, Jack, you're living in Vienna now. Sometimes you look out your window and you see the pyramids faintly. That's what's going on here.
Right? The sun glinting off of them. But beyond that, so the pyramids are obviously the best part of here. But in terms of the equipment of the Mamluks, like this is why I think the painter heard Egypt, like Egyptian Mamluks, and literally couldn't find anything about the actual Mamluks. So what he chose to depict here is some sort of weird mishmash of like ancient Egyptian weapons and armor. You have this Kopesh. Is it Kopesh, like the sickle axe or some sickle sword? Is it? they call it, or axe sword.
Yeah,
kind
it
of
definitely
thing.
looks like it doesn't belong here.
The bows are not what you would. So for the Mamluks, you would expect a sort of the traditional Turkic, Mongolic double recurve bow. And this, he has, I guess, this sort of ancient Egyptian style self bow. The actual equipment here, we have some sort of weird, I think, Ottoman era Jijik helmet, some sort of like plated mail here. These other guys have kind of, I guess, whatever reference they found, this style of Egyptian helmet. Bows or arrows are carried on the backs here. They should be carried on the hips, like from hanging from the belt. Because then when I first saw this, I assumed this is some guy doing a painting of like some ancient Egyptian battle, and it's gotten mislabeled as Angelus. But if you actually zoom in on what's happening in the background, you see some of it. They've actually tried to depict Mongols in the background, like Mongol equipment.
Yeah, he's got sandals on too. That's
is he? Does he?
Oh, yeah, he has some sandals. It's like he's an ancient Egyptian charioteer or something.
Yeah. And this is from a book, and I don't remember the name of the book now, but they had a couple paintings by the same author, and they're all about the same level of quality.
This is why you should not be intimidated to write a book. Anybody can do it.
And this is the problem, is that people just, they accept this, and now it's on Wikipedia, and because it's on Wikipedia, it has that stamp of
take it down.
Authority.
Yeah, it seems like it's real, but even it's weird because even the Wikipedia page is not wrong. The Wikipedia page is not telling you that the battle happened in Egypt. It's apparently plausible that you could see the pyramids. That's yeah. We got a question coming in. How many days do the research and scripting usually take? I'd say probably like 7 to 14 days for the research. Something like this, especially the art, ends up taking extra days for research, as we'll get into in a second. And then the script takes about a week to write as well. But we really wanted to get this one right this last episode, so we really took our time. This one was a little bit longer, but it's just basically just straight reading sources, trying to track down really, really specific details. And Jack definitely helped with this one. So some of my favorite art is AI art of the Mongols. Jack, are these historical weapons? It's photorealistic.
Looking at an archaeological site.
Look at the guy on the right, though. He has sort of like an American flag thing going on. It's kind of like
it's Captain America.
Mongol.
Yeah.
But I'm not really sure what they're holding. There's a lot of details. The guy on the left seems to not really have much of a face.
A boomerang.
But that's what's upsetting when you have these. What I was saying to Jack before the stream started is you're starting to see more and more historical channels actually just start using AI art. And if they were fantasy channels, it would be one thing. But if you're supposed to be historical, you're supposed to be educational, you want to get these details right. And if people are coming away saying that the Mongols had sort of like plated Aztec armor with American flag colors on it, they were huge
fighting
patriots.
With a paddle, apparently.
Yeah, the guy on the left's weapons aren't even sharp. I kind of would like to see what combat looks like there. I think he's playing cricket.
The YouTube shorts are really bad for using this AI art.
Yeah, I mean, look,
they'll use an AI
art
voice
done a lot
too.
quicker. But it's definitely feels a little dystopian. This one was my favorite one though, because the next one that I have posted in here is a specific person. So there should be tons of references to get this right. This is the man himself, Genghis Khan. And that's just him on the left.
Wait, his armor is also molded to look like his pectoral nipples.
It's not even like breastplate armor. It actually lines up with his nipples.
Yeah, so it's almost like it's just see-through.
That's how wealthy he was. He just had guys molding that stuff. And he was really jacked too.
He just had really hard nipples and they pushed through the armor. It was so strong.
The guys on the right too.
The legends say.
Sometimes you'll see these AI prompt sites. Joe has seen people using his name, so it's scanning some
Yeah.
of his art to make some of it, which is that's kind of like the strange thing about AI art, is that it's algorithmically pulling from people who actually did the work for that art. Look, if you want to pull from the Egypt Einstelut painting, be my guest, but it's a little bit weird when it's coming from Joe's. I was wondering if the one on the right, this picture, it looks a little like Joe's stuff, like an amalgamation of maybe your fantasy paintings with the mountains in the background. That
Yeah.
did you paint Mordor at some point?
There's a prompt. Maybe my name was in it.
Yeah, so they wanted Mongols, but of course they have super heavy plated armor, and this was the Mongol invasion of Mordor. And
What are those towers
successful
back there? Like, it's just nothing.
They have spears too, but it's apparently attached to like their vertebrae or something. So yeah, so it's just nasty stuff. We don't like that art. Here's I don't know how zoomed in this is for you guys. I don't know how much. Yeah, you guys could probably see it. Okay. You can see this is just like this is some of the research that we do for our own art. So this is the outline of a document that is 41 pages long on Google Docs. That is just art references and requests for paintings from Joe. And so the way it works is that I'll be researching, or the script will be nearly done, and then I know I can sort of see what's coming up, and I'm like, okay, I definitely need this painting, and I will definitely need to know what the Mamluks look like and stuff like that. So that's the outline, and you can see it's just, you can click through, and I have really specific, this is what Mamluk robes look like. So that depiction from a manuscript in the top right gives some patterns from Mamluk robes. The swords that you see in the video is going to be built based on those hilts, and the armor is also based on that. And actually, the outline goes even farther than that. You can see I have an entry for Mongol hair too. So I just basically, we've come up with a system that still takes a really long time, but it's kind of like it ends up being more efficient for me to just compile an enormous guide for Joe. And then I can just say, okay, Mongols charging here. And then when he wants to know what the garrison looked like or the Mongol heavy cavalry look like, you can click on that section of the guide and get a sense for some of that armor and stuff like that. So yeah, this was the Sultan Kutus in the video. Jack, I think you sort of gave me the heads up on the hairstyle that the early Mamluks would have had, because I believe this was a Turkic hairstyle, correct?
This is a very old Turkic hairstyle, going back at least to the Gökturks, if not earlier. So the hair, and we know this from both textual descriptions, but also even rock art in the Altai Mountains and in Mongolia, where essentially the hair is all tied back and comes down in long braids going down behind the head. And so in this, across much of the in the steppe world, or really across most of the medieval and ancient world, hairstyles often carry a lot of political connotations. So the way you shave or make up your hair is kind of a sign of submission to a given dynasty. So the most probably famous modern example of that is the Manchu and their conquest of China forced everyone to shave their heads and have their hair in just the one long braid coming down in the queue. And they were very effective in this, but the Mongols tried to do the same thing. And we get a bit less of explicit descriptions of Turkic states trying to enforce this, but we see through artwork through the Seljuk period and then into the early Mamluk period, the continuation of these of long hair coming down, of braids, of coming down beside the head, coming down behind. Now there's debate over whether like say the number of braids have political connotations. Like if you're a subject of this state, you do yours in 3 braids and 1 and 2 coming down like this, or if you do yours in 5 braids coming down, like there's details like this, but this kind of long braided hair is kind of a quintessential pre-Mongol nomadic hairstyle, and one of the Chinese descriptors of nomadic peoples in general is the peoples with braided hair, and this kind of association of them. And the hat as well that he's wearing here. This is a sharbush, I believe, sharbrush. And this is a very, very popular hat through the Seljuk period and into the early Ilkhanate, less so in the Ilkhanate, and also into the early Mamluk period. And it's kind of associated a lot with kingship. But it also I don't know about common, but variations of this type of hat were worn across the Turkic peoples in these states. Now, what's interesting as well, I think this might even be on the Wikipedia article still, but there's a very famous painting made in the mid 13th century of the ruler of Mosul, Badr al-Din Lulu. And he's painted up wearing, and his hair is in this kind of style.
Was that this one? The one on the top right here?
No, not
that might have
that
been that one. Oh, okay.
Or unless it's not showing up on my screen, but he's wearing, so he has a sharbush on, he has this hairstyle, and he has a specific type of embroidered robe, and so he's dressed up as if he's a sort of like Seljuk lord, except this guy's never been a vassal of the Seljuks, and I think he was Kurdish descent ruling what's now northern Iraq. So because of kind of the prestige and success of these states like the Seljuks, these clothing and hairstyles make their way outside of the state or they stay in lands that were formerly held by these states, and they stay on as this prestigious clothing style or hairstyle, hat style, whatever. And this remains the case up until the Mongol conquest, when then Mongol styles go and succeed over these pre-existing styles. So what you see in artwork after the Mongol period through like the Timurids and later Iranian states is clothing styles, which are, at least in the artwork, because artwork isn't necessarily what people are actually wearing, but in the artwork, at least, people are still, it's a visible continuity with these earlier styles popularized by the Mongols.
Wow. Okay, so we do have a comment. I know we've seen some other comments in our thing. Basically, for some reason, there's a good deal of concern about what Baybars and Kutus look like. Almost a racial concern. Now we know the Turkic people had such a wide range, and we actually don't know so much about the specific tribes that these people are coming from. So there's a pretty wide range in appearance, but I know you can speak a little bit more to it, Jack.
Yes. So there is a common stereotype in the medieval sources that all Turkic peoples look visibly more like how Kazakhs and Mongols look today, with epicanthic folds and all that. So you see kind of these in the Mamluk sources are quite lovely for this, because then now these become, because they're written for these people, these become like the markers of a really attractive person, to describe them as they call them Khwarezmian-eyed or small-eyed people, or cat-eyed is a somewhat ruder one, and that appears in some Persian sources describing the Mongols. But there is, with the Western Kipchaks, the people who we generally call Cumans, who Baybars came from, there may or may not have been lighter colored or even blondish hair among them. Now, the issue is that we don't actually have medieval sources describing Cumans broadly as blonde. This is resulting as a translation of the names for them, which tend to be things in Latin, Old Rus, Greek, things that translate to like pale people or something. Now, personally, I don't think there's often a lot of connection between these so-called tribal names and actual physical features of a group, because generally these names are named after whatever the founder's name happened to be, rather than, oh, all these people look like X, therefore we're going to name them X. Now, for Baybars in particular, though, we do get a kind of vague physical description of him, except it's written decades after his death by an author. I think his name's Al-Dahabi, and he's about 3 years old when Baybars dies. Now, he's, I believe, and I don't know this for certain, but he's the earliest that I found in any Mamluk chronicle who gives these details of Baybars having a cataract in his eye. And he's describing a palish face on Baybars, and I think Kutuz gets described as having a reddish face. And then he uses a word for his hair, which is Ashgarani, I think it is. Now, this has certain connotations of light-colored hair or lighter-colored hair. And some people sort of like to, in Arabic at least, because it's slightly different connotations in Persian. But some people have translated this as blonde, so saying that Baybars was blonde. But the question is a 14th century Mamluk author, and I don't remember if Al-Dahabi was Cuman or if he was Arab, is his visualization of lighter colored hair going to be blonde or just lighter color in comparison to the majority Arab population in Egypt at the time? And we don't know that. So we don't know.
And actually, I had Joe sort of split the difference in the video. So this is Kutus, but our Baybars one has almost a bit of a reddish or browner feel to his hair. So it's almost like, but basically the conclusion is we're making our best plausible guess at what these people look like. We don't have you don't have art at the time that is attempting to legitimately depict this sort of a photorealistic way of how somebody looked.
No. And if the only description you have is by someone who never saw the guy himself and is writing decades afterwards, you can only trust that so far.
Right.
It might be who knows.
Yeah. This this was another cool detail that we had in the art. So you'll notice in the beginning of our most recent video, we had the Mongols taking over Aleppo. Now the citadel in Aleppo still exists today. That it's this hill that rises over the city. Some of the walls have been changed out. There's some of it that still is original. And unfortunately, I believe some of it has been impacted by the Syrian civil war, as a lot of really beautiful architecture has been damaged by it. But you can see that the inspiration Joe took from it. So you kind of have the same general shape when the Mongols are taking Aleppo, and you have you still have the citadel, the garrison in the citadel that I've heard a couple different accounts. Sometimes they say that they held out for weeks. Sometimes they say they held out for 40 days. But the point is, they were sort of forced to fight there and just watch everything get destroyed around them, or at least the people massacred.
One really nice detail Joe's included here is the depiction of the trebuchet. Now, Aleppo might actually be the first case where Mongols use trebuchets, because they don't appear to have access to them before this point. However, you get to Aleppo, this major, really this huge, well-defended fortress, and the actual fortress, with the exception of the garrison up in the citadel, falls rather quickly. And there is a suggestion that's been made, I believe by Kate Raphael, that the Mongols acquired trebuchets directly from their Christian vassals in the region, so the Principality of Antioch, who might either already had these in their retinue or provided engineers to show the Mongols how to make them. And then the Mongols, or Hulagu at least, had them in his entourage, and famously, a little over a decade later, sends fellows trained in making these machines over to China to help Kublai Khan in his conquest of Xianyang in China. But this is it does not seem that they had access to trebuchets before. We just know all of a sudden the Ilkhanate has them. It has guys enough that they can send engineers out east to show Kublai, and so it's probable siege of Aleppo, the first opportunity the Mongols actually used these machines, and the Mongols rarely found a weapon they didn't like to use.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the really interesting things about the Mongols is that they seem to almost encounter a bunch of people. And the Mongols, what I think makes them so interesting is that it's sort of they're meeting everybody. They conquer so much land that they meet so many different troops, and they're sort of very pragmatic about the way that they approach warfare. And it seems like they pick up a technique or they have some flaw in their game plan and they're like, yeah, let's go add that to our army. They're sort of not very precious about guarding their own tactics or anything like that.
The one thing they might have been rather cautious about was gunpowder weapons, because there are somewhat indirect suggestions, or not indirect, but there is some argument that the Mongols brought gunpowder weapons with them westwards, because we know they used them in China in the form of bombs, thunder bombs,
and they use them in Japan, correct?
Yes, but so there's one Chinese account which has in the invasion of Khorasan, a Chinese captain in Mongol service using fire arrows against a Khwarezmian fleet blocking a river. And there are a couple instances during even in the invasion into Europe and the sacking of the Rus cities, and a horse against the Ismailis as well, where some sections have been interpreted as referring to gunpowder weapons. But the problem is, because no one at the time who had a word for gunpowder weapons, they don't know how to explain these things. So they just go, well, okay, this is another form of Greek fire, or they've set fire to this somehow, or and there's the description of one of the siege of the Ismaili fortresses. I think it's Alamut. Some of what Juvayni, a Persian writer in Mongol service and Hulagu service, he's describing like the shafts of the Mongols going and exploding and sending like shrapnel and killing multiple Ismailis at once, in contrast to the Ismaili counter siege weapons, which can only kill a single guy at a time. So some people have interpreted this as a reference to the Mongols are firing some sort of like from a ballista-like weapon, an oxbow, it's called in Chinese. Not in China, it's a translation from the oxbow, firing basically a large arrow with a gunpowder
oh, right. I think that might have been Maymun D's, because I had...
yeah, that sounds...
Remember I made a painting where we tried to depict that.
But the problem is that Juvayni, he is just the epitome rather, of medieval Persian poetic writer. So all of this phrase of all these things about striking down the heretics or whatever might just, yeah, exactly like that. All of his description might just be him being poetic and not being literal at all, because he does that all the time.
Painting I did.
So,
yeah, and one of the really cool things I thought, some of the armor was we were sort of encountering some of the coolest armor we've seen in our Mongol videos in this one. This was a piece of armor that we show in the video as an example of Mongol heavy cavalry, and it had actually been Jack showing me this. It's usually here's a little snapshot of our Discord messages where Jack would send references and stuff like that. But usually thought to be Kuman Kipchak. And you had mentioned that more recently, it's thought that maybe it is connected to the Mongols.
Well, so the entire Kuman Kipchak identification here came after a line of Soviet researchers, after like they're saying like, oh, they're Persian, oh, they're Norman, they're this and that. They made all these suggestions and then kind of settled onto their Kipchak, because they are found in some of them are found in kurgans, in burial mounds or burials of warriors whose um, items they were buried with were identified as being Cuman. And the thing is, they probably are Cumans in these graves, except basically every single one of these graves has items also dating to the late 13th or even 14th century. And this specific helmet style you're seeing, this cutout and tent shape that it has here, this is not a helmet style which comes to the region until after the Mongol conquest. Now, as well, we also have examples of these masks, or not these specific ones with the mustache, but very similar types of these masks appearing in association with the Jin dynasty in North China, who the Mongols fought with. That's to the 12th century, and these funerary masks are also quite common in the Khitans and the Lao. But we also have in the Ilkhanate, so in the Mongol Ilkhanate, depictions exactly like this of what appears to be protective masks. Now, the one sort of outlier here is a Seljuk manuscript, generally dated to 1250, but I don't know how precise this date is, which appears to show this as well on a Seljuk warrior. But after 1250, the Seljuks are now vassals to the Mongols. So this could even be an example of an early adoption of this, like the latest styles making it into the Seljuks and them depicting it in a brand new manuscript. So it's sort of this mask has become kind of the quintessential piece of Cuman Kipchak material culture, and it might not be one that they might have used it before or something like that before the Mongols arrived, but we don't have definitive pre-1230s examples of these specific types of mask being found in association with Cuman burials. So these masks might have been actually a common feature of Mongol heavy cavalry, kind of a prestigious item, and that spread throughout the region as a result of the Mongols. So
yeah, and I say in the videos that it could be sort of brought by the Mongols, or it could be pillaged along the warpath. The Mongol armies, we had been talking before I released the episode, you just see such a huge variety of armors. There's no standardized uniform or anything like that. So it's entirely plausible that you have them pillaging pieces of armor anywhere along the warpath, or copying regional styles and sort of incorporating that into their.
Well, we know during the invasion of Europe, we have letters from the Holy Roman Emperor, and he's complaining that after the battles in Hungary and Poland, the Mongols have started looting the bodies of the fallen knights and started wearing their armor. And in my video series I just did on the Mongol heavy cavalry, I had sort of a cheeky comment on the end where it's technically possible that a Mongol warrior at the Battle of Muhi took a Templar's great helm, put it on, and then he ended up going all the way back east and wound up in like the Japanese invasion fleets and ended up in Japan with there's no proof of that specifically happening, but it is feasible that kind of thing.
Yeah, they'll find it in a bay in Japan. You'll find a Templar's helmet or something, which would be pretty insane.
It would be it's very it's extraordinarily unlikely, but it is feasible it could have happened. But we have all sorts of references to the Mongols doing this.
One of the cooler,
why would you throw away perfectly good equipment?
Yeah, and so it seemed like a lot of these manuscripts at the time were not necessarily depicting Mongols, but the fact that they're depicting these other events with armor that of course is not contemporary to the time. It's not. So the next one I'll show you is an example of this. This is something Jack shared with me, and it's got to be some of my favorite Mongol armor. But if I recall correctly, you said that this was actually an Ilkhanate depiction of Alexander the Great.
Yes. So this manuscript, it's called usually the Great Mongol Shahnama or the Demota Shahnama, named after a Belgian art dealer who cut it into pieces to make more money off of reselling it. Uh,
Ooh.
so the Shahnama is this famous Iranian national epic kind of thing. So it's all these like ancient Iranian or early medieval Iranian stories. Um, Written down, I believe, in the 8th century, but I should probably look that up. So one of these big parts of the story is the figure of Sikandar, and his wars with the Persian king. And of course, Sikandar is Alexander the Great, and he becomes sort of this great hero in sort of the Islamic world. And there's all these monarchs who call themselves the second Alexander. So the Khwarezm Shah Muhammad, who is famously runs to his death after he kills the Chinggis Khan's merchants and envoys. He liked to call himself the second Alexander. So, but under the Mongols, there is a adoption of some of these like Iranian tales, like such as the Shahnama, which start to get illustrated probably for the first time under the Mongols. Now, there's some debate over why this happened. The Mongols really like these visual arts. You can see there's some Chinese influence in some of the composition and the clouds, for example, or the dust behind the fighters. So the Mongols loved painters. They love like artists of all kinds. So they'd collect them from all over the world as a part of their campaigns and like combine their techniques together. So this is probably produced around 1335. Really, just as the Ilkhanites about to collapse, they produced this huge, like this would be a fantastically expensive manuscript, and it's probably actually produced by the Vizier Ghiyath al-Din bin Rashid al-Din, so the famous historian Rashid al-Din's son, and produced probably after the death of Abu Sa'id. And so what they do is that they take all these people from the stories and they portray them as Mongols. So they're wearing Mongolian armor, they have Mongolian facial features, and sometimes they're contrasted with people who are depicted as Arabs or Indians or Libyans. But sort of the hero characters are always Mongolian. Sometimes they have different hairstyles to signify that they aren't Mongols, but usually the equipment is all, from what we understand at least this is a representation roughly of what early 14th century Ilkhanid armor is looking something like this. So we get these depiction of Alexander the Great via a Persian story appearing as a Mongol. You know, people argue maybe
there were two Mongol empires.
The ancient Mongol Empire. Alexander the Great was Mongolian. And people argue this is because the Mongol elite, their literacy wasn't very good, so they just, they wanted to look at pictures. I think it's more likely just a case of they're rich, they loved artists, they liked to put these together, they liked to see themselves. We know they did a lot of that. But also, just like every other painter up until the modern era, they don't care about trying to show these things historically. They depict everyone equipped as people in the modern sense are equipped. So just like
right, it's like medieval Christian art when the Roman soldiers around Jesus being crucified are going to look like medieval knights.
Exactly.
And
It's the exact same.
How much of that is their ignorance of what Roman armor was like versus just wanting to almost make it relatable to their audience or understandable.
But even if a painter in, I don't know, 15th century Netherlands wants to do historically accurate Roman armor, what's he going to do? What possible reference does he have?
Right.
He's not going to find anything. He can only look at modern examples. So
yeah. So I thought this was some of the coolest armor, like just the helmet with the little guard in there. And so we actually did show that our first heavy cavalry charge in the Battle of Ain Jalut, you can see this guy right here, has that. It's just a little detail. Who knows how many people noticed it, but even from far away, it kind of looks cool. Yeah, so I wanted to jump into sort of what didn't make the cut for this video. And then, this is going to sort of, we'll be done with the art for now. and this will start our kind of general Mongol discussion. And also, we'll just open it up. If you guys have any questions about the Mongol Empire as a whole or Einjalut specifically, have them come in and we'll get to them. But yeah, one of the ones I wanted to get it started with was something you mentioned to me, Jack, when I mentioned how the Ayyubid prince. So in the video, I mentioned how the Ayyubid prince over, or Sultan, he was called, over Damascus and Aleppo. We discovered that he was beheaded from Hulagu's letter that probably didn't reach Louis IX, but I believe it was discovered in 1980. And we learned that he was beheaded and his head was stuck atop a gate. So I was a bit curious about, would they do that? I know that they're, for example, with the Caliph of Baghdad, there was Mongol superstition about spilling royal blood. So I'm like, okay, well, you're really just gonna, normally they had to drown the people or trample them with horses or something. And then you described to me, you're like, no, actually, there are other accounts of them doing this to other Ayyubid princes, doing much worse things than stick their head atop a gate.
There is an emir of a city in northern Iraq, and he rebels, I think, following the Battle of Anjalut. And he rebels, or his city finally capitulates. I don't remember the precise order now. But anyways, Mongols are angry at him. They hold out the worst punishments for someone who holds out for a really long time or who submits and then later rebels. So what they do with this guy is they tie him to a post. They stick him out in the sun in northern Iraq. They cover him in sheep's fat and leave him there. So he's still alive. So what happens is, according to the source, I think it's Rashid al-Din again, what happens is that flies come and start to lay eggs in the sheep's fat on the guy. And then the eggs hatch and maggots start to eat. So what happens is twofold. This guy is dying of dehydration and exposure being left out in the sun. And also maggots are eating him alive at the same time. And they don't specify, I think, how it ends, but it's not, he doesn't get rescued. And there's all manner of things like that. There's one administrator who falls on the wrong side of Berka's older brother, Batu. And he gets punished. There's two different versions of it. One is like he's boiled alive, and then the other one, he gets his hands and feet cut off. And I think what happened here is both of these things happened. Like they cut his hands and feet off and then threw him in the boiling water. There's another one where a fellow he's forced to like eat dirt, or they fill his mouth with rocks until he dies. One of the worst ones is for a woman named Fatima, and because she was a favorite of Oghul Koymish, who is the regent of the Mongol Empire from 1248 to 1251. She was the widow of Guyo Khan. And Fatima was her favorite. Some people have even suggested lover. I don't know if there's suggestion for that. Anyways, Mernka, who became Khan in 1251, he hated Oghul Koymish. He hated like everyone associated with her. So Fatima gets accused of witchcraft, and there's a special punishment for women accused of witchcraft. You can't let them like make any spells or anything. So you have to sew up every single one of their holes, every orifice on their body. And I mean, every orifice on their body gets sewed up. And then she's I think, put in a bag or wrapped up in a rug and then thrown into a river.
Jeez.
Wow. Okay.
And she's still alive during the part where she's thrown into a river. It's,
when we actually, we have to make some artistic decisions, Joe and I, when we have some of these details. Yeah, to not get demonetized. So if we ever cover that story, Joe, don't paint that, please.
Well, even with the heads on the gates, like I remember Chris like wrote it into the like paintings to do document and told me where it would have been, what it might have looked like, time of day, all that was stuff.
In this last video, the
battle. Yeah, but he's like
Cairo.
Chris was really particular about like suggest that there are heads there, but make it look like it's not heads because we do not want to show 4 decapitated heads in the full glory on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and we actually went into enough detail. Like I discovered that okay, the gate looked pretty much the same as it does today. It's still, you can look up Babzuela. It looks it's still standing, but it didn't have the minarets behind it. I think those weren't constructed
Yeah.
for another couple hundred years. But yeah, they they hung the heads there, and Joe ended up doing it a little bit at nighttime, but it actually made sense because some of the sources attest to the Mamluk army leaving at night shortly after killing the envoys. And my thinking behind that was that basically once you kill the Mongol envoys, you don't want to waste any time waiting for them to find out.
So I'm wondering with how creative the Mongols were in their executions and punishments, was that, probably would be too simplistic to say it's just pure sadism. Was there a sort of pragmatism behind it, sort of a cautionary thing for others? Or does it just boil down to they like to be creative with their killing?
Well, these really bad ones, or almost in every case, are specifically punishments for someone seen as committing treason or rebellion, or worst crime of all, getting on the wrong side of a faction in a political struggle, and your side's the losing side, and the guys in charge now are just kind of pissed at you and have found some sort of charge. I mean, whether it's sadism or anything, like the question too, of course, is did these people actually die like this, or the Mongols, either the Mongols or the people writing for them, are specifically spreading really worse versions so that everyone else listening knows what the payment is if they step out of line? Because a lot, and you dealt with this as well, Chris, looking at Tulugu's letter to Louis. He's bragging about killing 2 million, or King Louis of France, I should say. He's bragging about killing 2 million people at Baghdad. You know, there's the Mongols understand that fear moves way faster than any horse, than any arrow. And if everyone you're dealing with is terrified and knows for a fact such horrific death awaits them if they piss off the Mongols, but at the same time, the Mongols do make an effort to treat you better if you actually submit. They have favorite groups. They go out of their way to be like, see, look how nicely we treated these people. Even if they don't actually treat them nicer, in fact, they make a show of pointing out, look how nice we treated people. One of the details I really like, and I believe you included this in the Baghdad video as well, the Siege of Baghdad, is that during the siege, the Mongols are all the time sending arrows into the city with messages on them saying, we are going to provide clemency to this group, to this, like, usually religious minority, Christian, whatever. They have, before the siege of Baghdad even begins, there's a Shia community in the Zagros Mountains which submits to them, and they provide troops in the fight. And I think they have, like, one of their guys is like going up to the walls and saying, like, for their like co-religionists in the city, like, guys, submit. We've achieved favor for our guys. The Mongols aren't going to be looking for you when they get into the city. And one of the things people get wrong about the siege of Baghdad is that when they portray it, they portray like this madness of like the bloodlust Mongols going everywhere, destroying everything in the city. And it's not mindless brutality, because what you actually see in the sources is they're very deliberate. It's not like hacking to pieces. It's like a almost surgical dismemberment of the city, because there's sections of the city they mark off to leave. Like, we have this account of a musician, and they're in this basically a gated neighborhood within, or like a suburb within Baghdad. It has like its own walls, so it's like a rich community. And this musician, he plays, like, he has a feast and bribes Baju Noyan, the Mongol commander who goes into the city, and he says, like, hey, if you're nice to us, or If you spare our section, we'll put on this feast and give you these gifts and things. And Baiju really likes this guy's music and takes him to play for Hulagu. And he gets Hulagu drunk during his performance because he has a story of like, oh, my music will make you fall asleep, Hulagu. And Hulagu actually didn't want to drink, but the guy, to sort of hedge his bets, makes Hulagu get drunk and fall asleep before the end of the song. But anyways, his neighborhood gets spared. And they're sparing these certain blocks of the city. And the thing is, you can't get your soldiers to spare specific blocks of the spare specific blocks of the city if this is a total mindless blood crazed massacre. It's precision. The troops are under orders. They're sacking specific neighborhoods, sparing other ones, and the ones that do get sacked, they suffer horribly. But the ones who are spared, they pay a bribe, and they have to watch all this horrible destruction, and probably, they're happy their stuff is spared, but they're probably not too happy about the whole situation, of course.
Right, and I mentioned in the Baghdad video that they're sent house to house, and it's meant to imply that they are not sort of just running by themselves. It's not like we're in the walls and go do whatever you want. And actually, Joe's art is them sort of not running, but walking through the streets because they would have, it seems, would have had a clear, basically map out of where you attack and where you don't, who's punished and who's not.
Yeah, I think I recall you saying at the time, Chris, that like the depiction of them going through the street shouldn't just be like panic, chaos, because like Jack was saying, they have their objective and they know what they're doing. Very surgical.
I mean, I'm sure the people were panicking, but not the Mongols.
Oh yeah. And then also, wasn't there a part, I know we mentioned in the Baghdad video, but they rallied up a lot of the surviving citizens, and did they divide them up according to their occupation and stuff? Is that correct?
This is something that happens in a number of sieges, and it's what the strategy is you usually try and get during the city submission that they send everyone out of the city before you go in, because it's easier to keep these people under control, sort them, and it's easier to loot the stuff in the city if there's not going to be people fighting in all the houses, putting up last stands and having this awful street-to-street fighting. Now, sometimes they bring the people out in front of the city and then kill them all, or sort them and go, okay, craftsmen, you're going to Mongolia, or we're allotting a certain percentage of you to go serve for this Mongol prince now, or whatever. The rest of you, you're slaves, and the men of fighting age, you're put into the hashar, the sort of living meat shield to go in front of the army and push siege equipment and soak up enemy arrows.
Yikes.
Okay, so I want to get to some of these questions. We have some really great questions in here. I'm going to do one that sort of combines a couple different ones. Thank you for the super chat mantra. Said, hi, I'm from India and love your vids. Are you planning on covering Mongol probes into Vietnam after Kublai and the fall of the Khanates? Yeah, we could do some more sort of like collapse of the Mongol Empire and infighting. The other idea we had, and this is where I can sort of rope in another question from Artur. What are some topics you think you could make together? My thinking was a couple of the other ones that we would do, and I had been talking with Jack about this. So this is almost in a way the conclusion of a chronological series on the Mongols, but it in no way has been comprehensive, because it ended up being like we started following Hulagu at a certain point, probably with the Mongol assassin ones. And in order to cover it all, you have to basically ignore the Golden Horde for that. So we could come back and do individual battles, Battle of Muhi. But the other thing that we could do is something related to India. If we want to do Timur, I think could be very cool. You could even do like one long episode on him. You'd get, in a way, it's sort of Return of the Mongols. And it's not me saying that, it's him saying that. Timur saying that. And then the other thing I was thinking was a series on the rise of Genghis Khan, and just sort of, I feel like so much of our Mongol series has been on those really interesting cross-cultural interactions. Essentially, what are the Mongols doing in Europe? What are the Mongols doing so close to Egypt? Not at the pyramids, but relatively close. And it would be cool to get back and almost see the rise of the Mongol Empire and get to sit with Mongolian culture and, in a way, almost try to understand a little bit more about the thinking and the culture and the religion of the Mongols. And of course, there would still be all of the brutality and more that we've come accustomed to. On that same subject, though, I was thinking, my question for you, Jack, was does it seem like the Mongol ethic is pretty consistent throughout the ages? So when you're looking at pre-Temujin or his rise, is it basically the way that they're treating the people of Baghdad, the way that they're treating all of these foreign rulers? Is this exactly how they were treating each other and the different tribes on the steppe?
If you are to take the accounts written at face value, then yes. In the secret history of the Mongols, and this also, variations of this story also pop up in some of the other in Rashid al-Din and the Yuan Share and some of the Chinese accounts made for the Mongols. So after one of the defeats of Temujin, his defeated soldiers are thrown into pots of boiling water by his former friend turned enemy Jamuka, and then Jamuka ties the severed head of one of the princes to his horse, and he runs off. But then all of a sudden, in the next passage, you have all of these people then going to join Temujin, and people have interpreted this as Jamuka's actions were so extreme that it like frightened off his allies, going, "Whoa, you've gone like a step too far there, bud." The problem is all of these accounts of what life was like in pre-Temujin Mongolia are written like after 1250, or they're written down in after 1250. Even the secret history of the Mongols, the most likely composition date is probably 1252, and it's the earliest surviving piece of the Mongolian historiography, with probably a couple components of it produced in like the 1230s. And okay, the one other early surviving piece is a stone inscription, which might date to 1224, but some people date it to the 1240s. Anyways, the problem is we don't have this on the ground eyesight of what's happening before the rise of Genghis Khan. And if all we can do is read backwards from stuff written decades or even centuries later, is this really an authentic understanding of what's going on? Now, nomadic peoples were fully capable of sacking cities and doing massacres before the Mongols, but any army is, of course, capable of doing that pushed to the right conditions. Now, of course, you have fellows like Attila, who is, the scourge of God and this horrible guy. And so this is a stereotype in medieval sources, which does get associated with nomads. But whether this is something consistent throughout steppe history, I'm not convinced of that, because I'm not convinced you'd see the same volume of sieges and sacks of cities under earlier nomadic peoples, because the Mongols, what sets them out is they're so good at taking cities quickly. And not now other nomadic states, they can also take cities, but generally these sieges aren't as quick, or they're more of blockades, or they have some siege machines, but they don't have these vast crews that the Mongols would employ. The Mongols, we have one siege in China, they're supposed to be employing like 400 catapults on like one corner of the wall, kind of thing. Like, these are huge teams here. And when you're very good at getting into cities, you're very good at doing things to that population.
So something a bit related to the Mongol ethic. A good question here from Subutai. I don't know if it's the original Subutai or just a pretender. How prevalent was Buddhism in the Il Khanate and the Golden Horde?
Well, Buddhism was sort of, I would not say an official state religion, but we see lots of the early Khans in the Ilkhanate are nominally Buddhist or Buddhist leaning. So Hulagu himself, Buddhist leaning. Some of his sons and successors, obviously Buddhist. But by the time of Ilhan Ghazan, who he becomes Ilhan in 1295, so he's sort of, this is the main conversion to Islam of the Mongol royalty, because he's not the first Muslim Ilhan, but he's the one who makes the conversion permanent. And after him, the Buddhist element mostly disappears, though his brother and successor Oljetu, obviously a Buddhist name already, has a fling with Buddhism, but I think before he becomes Khan. So it is like Buddhism has sort of this kind of brief, like what's the best word here? Sort of glory day in the early Ilkhanites, and then dissipates by the turn of the 14th century. In
Now,
the
was
Golden
that
Horde,
sort of?
oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, you mentioned the Golden Horde as well.
In the Golden Horde, we have just less evidence. The thing is with the Ilkhanate in the Yuan dynasty, so the Mongols in the Middle East and in China, these are where basically all of our surviving Mongol-produced historical pieces come from. So we know fairly well what's going on in these two states, but for like the Golden Horde and the Chagatai Hanate, we have almost nothing produced by these states that survives, or what information we do get comes from like people who passed through or were subjects kind of on the fringe of the state. So we don't really have very good information on this aspect. We get, like in the Chagatai Khanate, you'll get someone who might be mentioned offhand as a Buddhist, but then another source says he's a Christian, and it seems to be because the author was a Muslim and he didn't really understand the difference between them. You get the odd indication from archaeology in the Golden Horde, because there's just really great archaeology or archaeological study that's been done on the Golden Horde, and you'll get like the odd indication of like Buddhist objects that are there. So there's some amount of Buddhist population, and you get the odd name which shows a connection to Buddhism, but we just don't really have very good surviving evidence for Buddhism in the Golden. It's there, but not in a great amount.
On the topic of religion and the Mongols, something I've been wondering about. So we know that the Mongols had a wide array of beliefs. I mean, we have like Kitbuka, Burkai Khan, were, you know, Christian and Muslim respectively. What was there a Mongol theology at all? Was there any concept of this is heresy, or like how did they envision these other gods, these other faiths? Were they kind of henotheistic, or?
So we get this really great passage written in the early 1250s. So we have a Franciscan missionary. Sorry, he's not a missionary, but he is a Franciscan, and he goes to the court of the great Khan, Mönke. And so this Franciscan, his name's William of Rubruck, and he writes an account of his journey, and he actually stops and has an interview with Mönke Han. This is like 1253, I'm pretty sure. And this is done through his translator, of course. So there's a bit of an asterisk here, because he complains a lot that his translator is not very good. So we don't know how precise the translation is. But what he says, what Rubruck says, is that Mönke gave this description of kind of how they view religion, where just as there is 5 fingers on the hand and they all stem from the palm, so too has God provided all of these religions. So that Mönke's view, at least, is that all of these religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever, are all deriving from the same source, the same sort of true God. And this is, in Mönke's imagining at least, this is Tengri, this is eternal blue heaven.
Sort of like a Baha'i faith almost.
In a way,
it's a way
like
to meld them.
the question is this a belief this is existing before the Mongol Empire, or is this developing as the empire is expanding and the Mongols are almost making a theology to better incorporate all these other religions? Now, are the Mongols also seeing these religions as true? In a sense. So everyone's probably familiar with the famous Mongol religious tolerance. Now, this is not tolerance how we would imagine it today. It's kind of more like the Mongols would extend tax exemptions and certain privileges mainly to four main groups: Christians, Muslims, Taoists, Buddhists. And on occasion, they extended this to Jews, but there's like 2 or 3 times where this is explicitly mentioned. So they would do that, but at the same time, they would ban specific parts of the faith that they didn't like circumcision or halal and kosher slaughter. They would ban these on punishment of death. So from their point of view, you can still practice your religion as long as you don't do these parts that we don't like, which is kind of hard when these are core tenets of some of these beliefs. Now, they're not generally doing this all the time to be punishing or discriminatory, but sometimes they are. But the reason these 4 groups are chosen, this is not like from the start of the empire, because at the start of the empire under Chinggis Khan, when these privileges are passed out, they're given to men who are specifically seen as somehow charismatic and connected with heaven in some way, regardless of their faith. And under his successors, this solidifies into these 4 main groups. And it seems to be because the Mongol conception was all of these groups had kind of states or dynasties associated with them. And if your religion is true, that means your God has power, and that power manifests into actual states and power on earth. And if your religion doesn't have a state in their eyes, you don't get to be given these privileges. So for Hindus, for example, there's very few Hindus in the Mongol Empire anyway, so it doesn't matter. But the only part of India the Mongols have any real interaction with is North India, which is ruled by Muslim powers. So from the Mongol point of view, if the Hindu gods actually had power, the Mongols would be dealing with a Hindu state in northern India, not a bunch of Islamic dynasties ruling over smaller Hindu and Muslim powers. So this is how they're conceptualizing it, and it sort of develops over the course of the 13th century.
So the question I posted up here, I guess also applies. He mentions it in the context of Islam, but just any conversions that are happening along the way. I would think specifically Christianity and Islam. Do we know how those converts are looking back at their previous belief? Are they trying to sort of reconcile the beliefs of their forefathers with their new beliefs? Because it would seem rather easy for the original Mongols to sort of hold on to that henotheistic religion. You meet a new religion, there we go. That's another god we will add to the pantheon. But there is, when you become a strict monotheist, you have to sort of go back and say, well, actually, we can't be tolerant of these other religions, and we deny what they are saying about this.
So we see this wonderful thing where in some of these 14th century Ilkhanate sources, they make Chinggis Khan retroactively almost a Muslim. Like they say in one of these accounts that he was a Muslim in all but name. He just if only he'd professed the Shahada, because everything else he was doing was like a Muslim. So they, for like the honored ancestors like Chinggis Khan in that first generation, they kind of get posthumously promoted to almost Muslim, like Muslim enough, even if they weren't in life. To their descendants, they become. Now, by the late 13th century, early 14th century, there is kind of this mix where there'll be a the Khan or individual in question will have officially converted to Islam. He's taken an Islamic name, but then the source will mention him taking part in a ceremony that's clearly a Tengriist shamanic type ceremony, or the guy's consulting a shaman. And this is something that still happens in Mongolia today. Mongolia is officially Buddhist, but people will still go consult a shaman for something. Now, this is because in the Mongol theology, let's call it, their worldview is that what these religions are, the Islam, Christianity, whatever, these are concerning what's happening to you once you die. But you still have to deal with shamans and these classes of people, because shamans deal with what is happening just in this world and interacting and convening and understanding the spirits that inhabit things in this world. So they don't see a dichotomy, or they don't see an issue with consulting a shaman on your way to go to prayer, to your Friday prayers. It's now there is pushback. There's famously Uzbek Khan, the great and powerful Khan of the Golden Horde. There's this tale that comes up after his death, where a Sufi sheikh, Baba Tuklas, has like a competition with shamans, and sometimes I think in some versions they might be like Buddhist monks, but I don't remember precisely now. And the Baba Tuklas comes out on top because they tried to go through ovens, and whoever emerged through this oven unscathed, their religion was true, and the shaman gets burnt to death. But Baba Tuklas, he goes in there, and he goes into the oven, and they open up the oven, and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing? It's not even like warm in here yet. You're letting all the hot air out." And it's this is not like an actual story, but it appears like after Özbey's death, and sort of like a folktale kind of thing. But there becomes, after a certain point, where like the shaman class itself isn't good for the ruler to have, but they're still around in some of these practices. We have the occasional like traveler account going through like the former lands of the Golden Horde, where they're still encountering what appears to be shamanic or Tengriist practices, like well into like the 16th century in some cases, and even later. And like even in the Golden Horde, we have several, like the first Muslim Khan obviously is Berka, then you have another in the 1280s named Tördemanka, and then in the 14th century of Özbey. And every single one of these guys, if in their letters to like the Mamluks or to whoever, says, "We have cleared out all the infidels and converted everyone to Islam." And basically what happens is every 20 years, there's a guy who's getting in charge of the Golden Horde and saying, "Hey, I've converted everyone to Islam. There's no more shamanists, Buddhists, Christians, whatever left in the Golden Horde." So it's part of their depiction to Muslim states is to show themselves as almost like these Ghazi-like figures. But then at the same time, these policies are clearly not actually as effective as they are portraying, or if they're even being enacted at all. So it's in the short answer, I would say, is that there is more pushback against the Tengriist faith, probably by Islamic servants working for the Mongols and trying to make the state, the Khanate, a proper Islamic state, then there probably is active pushback on the part of the Mongol elite in most cases.
The Mongol elite that had become Muslim, you mean?
Yeah, the military elite.
Yeah, and I would think, I guess one of my questions about that original Tengriist faith, it seems like a lot of religions throughout history, you find basically an ethic that applies to the family and the community, that does not extend to your enemies. And so, you could basically write a very unflattering history of any people in history based solely on how they interact with their enemies, because people historically are not very kind to their enemies. And of course, the Mongols weren't. So for you, do you have any sense of how the Tengrius faith informed Mongol interactions? Was there a sense that no killing, no stealing among your own tribe, but beyond there, it's sort of free game. We have free rule to take the universe.
Well, in the accounts written by people who travel through the Mongol Empire, so guys like these Franciscans, John de Plano Carpini, William of Rubruck, Marco Polo, they will say that the Mongols, they're like very like strongly adherent to their own laws. Like they won't recognize laws of any other state, because the only legitimate state on earth is that of the Great Khan, of the Mongol Empire, ruled by the Chinggisid lineage. All of the earth has been provided by Tengri to be ruled over by the Chinggisids, by the Mongol ruling dynasty. And what these sources say is that the Mongols, maybe just amongst other Mongols or other peoples of the steppes, we should say, like they'll say things like, if someone loses a horse or drops a bow, no one will pick it up for fear of being punished for theft. And the punishment for theft is death. The punishment for everything is death usually, or rods, getting beaten with a rod a couple times. So we have sources saying these things. And then at the same time, we have other sources talking about how we were raided by our Mongol neighbors here, or like when the Khanites are broken up, so that these laws aren't necessarily applying to Mongols if they're ruled by a different branch of the dynasty. So there is like a lot of sources say that like that they will follow the word of their leader to their deaths, including the laws and these things. So there is an aspect of this, but it's not so much in the sense of divine punishment. It's very much a real world, the Khan's punishment. But because the Khan's word is in an effect a divine word, this combines in that sense.
Yeah, and in that last quote in the Mongol versus Mamluk video, it seems like you get a sense of Berka is mourning the fact that Mongols are killing other Mongols. And it seems to almost betray some sort of ethic that he has. In other words, he doesn't want to be fighting with his own family. But
this sentiment shows up all the
this
time. There's a great Mongol in 1304. All the Khanites put aside their differences and say, we're not going to fight anymore. We're going to, once more, we all recognize the Great Khan in the east, and we're going to expand again the empire again. We're not going to fight each other. And this lasts about 6 months before they start fighting each other again. So people are expressing this sentiment. They understand this is not ideal. But in practical terms, if he didn't want to be raided, why did he leave all his herds not watched, right? Why are you leaving all that wonderful cities there unspoiled? Well, I can go in there and take it. Or we want your lands. We're going to like they. It's one thing to be this belief exists, but it's another. So it's another for them to actually act on it. And sometimes they act on it and try to stop fighting between each other. Most of the time, it's not successful.
Right. There's an ethic. Okay. So I think we're going to wrap up here soon. But the one thing I wanted to get to before we do that was, Jack, you had sent me some really cool pictures of Mongol artifacts that you got to interact with recently. And so I kind of wanted to take a look at some of those. Because as I was telling Jack, I always feel this with history to some extent, but when you have a picture of how something played out in your mind's eye, it basically almost becomes a story, almost becomes, you might intellectually know it happened, but it can sort of become fictional in your mind. And so to me, it's always cool to go to museums and say, oh, actually these things existed in the world. And there was a time where it was the same way somebody might have feared nuclear war a few decades ago, they would have feared the Mongols coming. So Jack, talk to me about a bit about what we're looking at.
So these are all artifacts likely to be associated with the Mongol invasion of Hungary in 1241 to 1242. So this is a collection of mace heads and arrowheads found, I believe, if I remember correctly, all at the same site in the Kiskunshag, Kiskunshag, and in sort of what the Hungarians call Little Cumania. So these mace heads, it was like a monastery and like a small village near or small town near the monastery, and it was sacked by the Mongols. And so they found all of these items basically like in bodies or in like alongside the bodies of men, women, children. And what was somewhat horrific here is that they could tell, archaeologically speaking, none of these bodies had been buried and all these items had been left. So these are all like valuable metal items that, presumably the Mongols are swinging it and the haft broke on it or something. And they were broken in some manner. And the Mongols had enough. They didn't want to bring them with them. And so they left them there. And the area was so thoroughly depopulated that no one ever came around to pick these things up. They were just buried over with time. So these mace heads, there's all of these ones, they show like, and my finger too. So they show like Central Asian, I think Anatolian and like steppe designs, but all found in like one location. What that implies is people from all of these regions serving in the Mongol army or fighting there, or these weapons were produced there and the Mongols picked them up. Some of these arrowheads too, on the last slide, if you can just go back one.
Oh, yep.
So some of these arrowheads are bone. And this is something we see a lot in the sources too, that the Mongols are using bone arrowheads as well as iron arrowheads. Now, you might hear that and go, bone? What are you using bone for? Well, because bone, you can sharpen it into a very effective little arrowhead. It's cheap and plentiful, relatively easy to work with in comparison to iron. So if you want arrows for shooting unarmored targets or very lightly armored targets, and you don't want to possibly lose or break a more valuable metal arrowhead, you use a bone arrowhead. Now, I don't remember if it was one of these ones precisely or another one I had a picture of, but some of these ones were actually still found in the skeletons of slain people in the Hungarian kingdom. That when the archaeologists came there, one of these was like buried in like I think in about here, in like by the neck. Like the guy it was essentially like a little church, and they dug like these a defensive moat around it, and the Hungarians were fighting there, and it was overrun by the Mongols, and so all of these ditches were filled with Hungarian dead. They'd even like dug through like an old cemetery, like they were making this thing in such a hurry, and then they were killed there and just left. And some of these people had like these arrowheads still in them, where the Mongols hadn't been able to take them out or hadn't noticed them. It was when I was at this site. This is for a project we're doing with Kings and Generals. So we did some filming there, and we were filming and we're standing there, and you look down, and all over the ground, human bones everywhere. There are archaeologists like in the process of uncovering skeletons. They showed us a ditch. What it had been was that there was a monastery, and then the Mongols made a camp there over the winter. And they had this ditch running around the outside of the camp. And the ditch was filled with like thousands of remains of animals, not like just domesticated animals, but even like animals that had been hunted. And just once they were done, they were tossed in there. And at the very top layer, human remains. So what it was suggested is that you had the Mongols spent the winter there. They had this ditch dug around, and they just They slaughtered whatever animals they could, fill them in the ditch. And when they left the site, all of the prisoners or workers they had, the people who they'd probably brought in from the neighboring villages to dig this ditch. They then killed them when they left and tossed their bodies in the ditch. And when you're standing there at that site and you kind of start to, because you don't quite realize what it is at first, but then it kind of dawns on you as you're talking to the archaeologists and they're explaining it. And like, I remember like this chill going down my back, because it's one thing to read about all these sieges and stuff. It's another
Right.
thing to stand there and be like, this happened here. And there's no source describing it. There's no, everything we know about that site just comes through archaeology, and that all the people around who knew about it, they ran off. They never wrote it down. They died. Who knows what? And so all
And there
these
has to be
people,
so many sites like that, I would feel like,
it's
that are
just
just
scratching
unknown or
the
never
surface.
recorded.
So
Hungary
many
is
probably
full of these.
Mongol massacres that are just lost to time that we don't know about.
It's you get the big ones, the famous ones of the big cities, but there's how many of these smaller or mid-sized sites like this where it's just a monastery or some equivalent in some surrounding village, and they had
Where it was never
150
cleaned up
Mongols
either.
showed up, and it's there's no way I can describe to you the sense of when you're standing there the first time.
Mm.
And you can, not to sound sort of I don't know, corny, but like if you stood there and like close your eyes and focus, you could have heard the screams sort of thing. Like it's really like it's eerie. It's an eerie sight. It's uncomfortable.
What's the name
But
of
this,
it?
it's the monastery is called the nearby town is called Bugats, and I'm probably saying it wrong, but the monastery was called Peter Monastery, St. Peter's, not St. Peter's, sorry, like Peter Monastery, but in Hungarian, so Peter Monastero.
Okay.
Or
I would guess that
Sorry.
there's not much online about it right now if it's currently being investigated.
But we're bringing some of this material in with a project in Kings and Generals. We filmed like interviews with them, and they very graciously allowed us like all over to take videos. And we
Wow.
tried not to take videos of the bodies or anything because it felt a little disrespectful, and it is better to let people use their imaginations rather than. I think the people suffered enough in their life. We don't need to put them on YouTube as well.
Yeah, no, like I was saying before, it's sort of those moments when something becomes real in your mind, because as much about Mongols as anybody, but there is a different way of knowing about those things. That's what we try to do a lot with our channel is actually get to when there's a painting of a field and the mounds are actually bodies, you've learned something else about history that you wouldn't in just a raw recounting of the numbers involved or even just a telling of it. So
history is
different.
human. So whenever you can find that sympathetic nerve in you to put yourself there and feel what those people were feeling or what they were thinking, that's always a magical moment.
Right. What does it feel like when you're at the walls?
Yeah.
And you see the Mongols coming? What does it actually look like? Because I also think it's a lot easier for people to sort of gloss over different atrocities in history if you don't have to really look at them. If you only have to know this country was obliterated or its people were wiped out. But it's a different feeling if you look at it. And I feel like that's the exact same thing with any battle that you look at. Do you know Stalingrad if you can recount all the numbers of casualties? Yeah. But what if you look at it? What if there's footage of it or something like that? So, Jack, it's been awesome having you on.
Just to bring it back to Einjalut there, just very briefly to say, just imagine that it's hot and dusty and you got like no idea where your guys are because there's dust everywhere. Just for a moment to put yourself into the head of a guy. All you've got is a spear. You got pulled along by one of these armies and you're standing there and you don't even know who you're supposed to be killing and you're scared for your life. And that kind of. Did we just lose Chris?
I think we lost Chris.
He didn't want to hear any more about Einjalut.
No, my camera's
Sorry.
weird, at least on my end. But now I'm back.
Yeah, Jack was just describing the
I
pyramids.
ruined a
Angelut.
very cool hype up Einjalut moment.
Imagine you're at Einjalut and you're Baybars and you're badass and you're killing Mongols left and right.
Turns off.
You're picking up a guy and ripping him in half. War is cool, kids. Be a fighter. Be a
That's the point of the episode. But yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. I mean,
pleasure.
I said 45 minutes or an hour, but I think when it goes longer, it's usually a good sign.
It's not a bad thing.
Things we're rolling.
Is anyone actually still hanging around? Like, I don't have the
64 right now.
Oh, wow, it was decent for 2 hours.
Had people jumping in and
2
out. But awesome. All right. Well, we'll be in touch. Maybe
maybe do it again in the
Genghis
future.
Khan or Timur episode at some point. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. And if you're at all interested in going to Turkey, like Jack goes to Turkey, he can endorse it. We have our History Dose group trip, June 2024. Just click the link in the description. Check it out if you're interested. Buy a ticket, and we'll see you there. And the other thing to do before you go is the other clickable thing in the description is Jackmeister's channel. You can just go through the catalog. If you're still around here, you're interested in this stuff. There's so much detail that never really gets covered in our videos. And
Yeah.
you know, you might see it suggested in the art or something, but if you really want to sit with this stuff and learn a lot about the sources behind it or sort of cutting edge research, his channel is the place to go. So go subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you guys. Have fun in Turkey. You have to learn to say it right.
Turkey. Okay.
Turkey. Kolay gelsin. İyi şanslar. Görüşürüz.